welcome to our session, Is Your Supply Chain Being Blindsided by Cyber Threats? I don't know about you, but last night when I was going around the networking session, there were several people that had the little fobs, the little thumb drives. And after working on this session, when they handed me the thumb drive, I'd say, do you know where your company bought this thumb drive? Do you know where it was sourced? Do you know who loaded it, where they bought it from? Are you sure there's not malware? Everybody took their thumb drive away from me. They wouldn't let me take it back. But you know, once you start looking into this, you see potential for cyber threats everywhere. And the thing about it is people that would have ill intention are looking for it in ways we would never dream of. So part of our session today is to make us more aware of what some of those cyber threats are and how we work together to address it. Some of you are probably here because you learned the hard way how data can be compromised or a project that went wrong. Some of you are here because you don't know what you don't know. And some of you are here just because you were curious and you've already finished the project and you think it was very successful. But after the end of this, you're going to go back and go, gee, maybe we should see exactly what they are doing with their data or exactly how they are doing those upgrades. Maybe you'll leave with some other questions that you want to answer. Today we have with us some people in the industry that I think can help start this conversation. The first person is Bill Boer. Bill is with the U.S. Resilience Project. He's an advisor to that group. And they're a group out of Georgetown University, and they've been working on a project on how to keep the U.S. supply chain resilient. How do we make sure from all types of security threats, including cyber, but other types of threats to the U.S. supply chain, how do we keep it secure and resilient? And they have pulled in major corporations from around the U.S. to pull together best practices. So Bill is here to help moderate this conversation and talk about best practices as they apply to the utility industry. Next to him is Ron Schwartz. Ron is the Senior Vice President of Quality with Schweitzer and has been very involved in the discussions held with the U.S. Resilience Project about how to keep the supply chain in the U.S. Resilient and to keep it safe. For representing our utilities today, the next person that we have is with Encore. This is Jennifer Lee Sethi. She's the Chief Compliance Officer and is here to talk about what happens with contracts and how they work with supply chain. And at the end, we have Paula Gugino, and Paula is with Duke Energy, and she is the Director of IT Security to talk about the role that IT plays. But I think what you'll realize at the end of this is these types of cyber threats, they change daily. They change constantly. And so it's going to be all the factors that these groups represent tend to be in silos in utilities, and I think what's going to happen is we're going to have to find ways to stay in partnership in order to stay in front of some of these threats. So Bill, I'll let you take it from here. I do want to mention one other thing. We will have our presentation afterwards. We will have some of the material that they refer to, the report from the U.S. Resilience Project and some other best practices that Schweitzer and the other organizations will be available afterwards here, and there'll also be links on our presentation that you'll receive after the conference.
Thank you, Annette, and good afternoon to all of you. I want to welcome you to what I believe may be the most important session at this whole conference. On behalf of the U.S. Resilience Project, which is in Washington, D.C., and for those of you who may not be quite as familiar as those of us who live there, we define that as 76 square miles surrounded by reality. We're happy to be here. We want to thank USMA for inviting us to share the lessons learned and best practices in supply chain risk and management, and how those, along with the experiences of my colleagues on this panel, may provide a more functional roadmap for your integration of the supply chain and cybersecurity. Annette mentioned that we do have this report, which was done by the U.S. Resilience Project, that we will hand out afterward. I think you'll find some very interesting information in here about experiences that companies and other organizations around this country are employing in the cybersecurity world, as well as in the management of the supply chain as it relates to cybersecurity. So I hope that you'll pick this up. If we run out of them before everyone gets one at the end of the day, please go to www.usresilienceproject.org. I would also like to remind all of you that the only dumb questions are the ones that don't get asked. So please do join in this session and be a participant, not just a listener this afternoon. We may not have a canned answer for all of your questions, but we think by getting unique issues on the table, we begin the process of finding real solutions. As we've learned at the U.S. Resilience Project from reviewing best practices scenario across a wide range of industry sectors, prior preparation beats the heck out of reactionary solutions. We like to suggest that organizations look to the right of boom. To the left of boom. And what does that mean? That's a military term that means thinking ahead of the event itself. And we're going to talk a lot about that. By using your experiences and the best practices of others in working towards systemic solutions, we have found that you will be better prepared regardless of the origin of the event that triggers or needs risk mitigation. Many of the supply chain risk management tools that you have used over the years are just as applicable to the cybersecurity as are the physical security tactics that you have used previously. And I encourage you to keep that point in mind as you leave this session today and begin to think more and more about how cybersecurity and the risk management of the supply chain come together. Cybersecurity is a relatively new phenomenon to all of us, and it's sometimes difficult to make heads or tails of what ones and zeros mean, or perhaps more importantly, it's difficult to understand the people that talk in ones and zeros. But we want you to understand what they say, not because you need to become an expert in IT, but because it is now becoming such an integrated part of the supply chain. Your industry is relatively new to the global electronic market. Historically, you all have bought poles and transformers or sold those products. Today, there are so many new products and new services that are available in the supply chain where there can be bad things happening. The traditional tools of good contracting procedures don't always reach these unique IT supply security issues in today's market. For example, the ability to download corrupt software from anyone or any place in the world, either intentionally or accidentally, is a game changer. And that can happen virtually at any point in the end-to-end cycle of products and components to those products. However, cybersecurity is not just an IT problem. It must be looked at through the lens of traditional supply chain security issues as well. Despite some of the special problems in the IT supply chain, the risk of counterfeit, compromise, corruption entering the supply chain, there is something that exists in the supply chain best practices that will already address most of those issues. With that in mind, I want to remind each of you supply chain professionals that you do not, and I repeat, do not have to become an IT expert to work as a part of a team on these cybersecurity issues. The most critical step is communications, both internally and externally, to have all of the right people at the table. Yes, even those folks who talk in ones and zeros. And to take advantage of your professional colleagues without regard to industry sector to share the best practices and to discuss ways to prevent accidents and to stop the growing number of bad actors across the globe who make their day by ruining your day with their latest cyber tricks. This afternoon, we are going to highlight through best practices, examples, and success stories, the cybersecurity landscape. This is a beginning to the discussion, and we want this discussion to continue as not only this conference goes along, but as our need for cybersecurity solutions in the supply chain grows with every passing day and the invention of new and better tools with which all of us can do our jobs, but without the right security, we'll all find that we are behind the power curve as somebody else steals our ideas, steals our products, steals our intellectual property, what it may be. We want to be at the forefront of that. And again, I emphasize, just because it deals with IT doesn't mean that it's only involved in IT. If you think about bringing the team together, the team that you want to bring together is a holistic team of not only the engineers, the architects, the purchasing people, the supply chain and management folks, but you want to bring together human resources. Those people need to be involved in this. What happens if one of your suppliers or one of your own facilities has a problem? Again, looking simply at what's gone on in the last couple of days in Oklahoma, you see that there are issues there that need to be addressed. Your public relations people and your communications people, what is the story that you want to tell, not after the fact, but before the fact? These things need to be discussed as a holistic approach to supply chain security in a very changed world. And with that, I'd like to ask my colleague Ron about the qualities of their teams at Schweitzer and how they work with the purchasing and other departments to ensure the quality and security that will need to be built into the supply chain process in general at SEL, and how they are tweaking this process to address the ever-increasing need to improve cybersecurity. Ron?
Okay, thanks, Bill. I lead the quality efforts at Schweitzer Engineering Laboratories, and our company is building here in the U.S. systems to protect, monitor, control electric power all over the world. And so it's important to be aware of what Bill is talking about, the environment we work in. One of the things that we have done is focused on defining the risks inherent in a supplier base. We have an extensive new supplier evaluation where we have gone out to actually visit our suppliers and check their process control of any new supplier and our existing high-risk suppliers at least annually. So we have over several thousand suppliers, and what we do is we keep track of our, we have a parts risk database where we keep track of all the parts that we use in any product we build. And we assign a risk level of parts basically dependent on a couple of factors. If it's a custom part that's manufactured outside the US, that's very high risk. Lesser risk may be parts that are off-the-shelf parts that are manufactured in the US. So we have various risk criteria which drives our procurement policy. One of the things we do to mitigate that risk is to have inventory on hand to mitigate any problems such as Japan earthquake or any other supply disruptions. We have, for our highest risk category, we hold 6 months of inventory, and our moderate risk would be 4 months of inventory, and the low risk parts, of which there's typically multiple sources of that part, 2 months of inventory. So these are just some of the ways that we use both a combination of we look at parts, the supply chain in terms of 3 factors: technology, quality, and business factors. And the technology means we look at the risk in terms of, as I say, these parts that are custom parts. How hard would it be to design in a new part in terms of our supply disruption? The quality, of course, I mentioned we do on-site quality assessments and also measurement of the quality of the products that we get from our suppliers. And the business factors would be things like how good are the suppliers doing at on-time delivery, and you also have to look at how healthy are the suppliers. The suppliers, if the supplier is in financial trouble, that could spell trouble for us going forward. One of the things we do, in addition, just wrapping up here, is that we have an annual supplier conference at our facility in Pullman, Washington. And the reason we do that, we have typically about 300 suppliers attend, and that's to get to know the suppliers and their technology and capability. I think when you have a personal relationship with supplier personnel, that enables us to better get across our message of concern for the physical security and the overall supply chain robustness. And we do have even part of that conference when we talk to our suppliers about some of the cybersecurity risks that are present in our marketplace.
Thank you, Ron. As I listen to you talk about the need to be on top of these sorts of things, as I mentioned in this report, there are case studies that really do illustrate a lot of the points that I know that you all have questions about. And when you talk about your response time, Cisco uses a system that when the tsunami and earthquake struck in Japan, within 12 hours, they had identified all of their direct suppliers and their associated sites and components with other critical supply chain nodes so that they were able to respond to that. And you say, well, why is that so important to be able to respond so quickly? And I want to challenge all of you all to think in those terms because a report done by PricewaterhouseCoopers says that a company that reports a supply chain disruption experiences a 9% drop in share prices, and that 2/3 of the companies still lag behind their peers as a result of that announcement for over a year. So it's not just about being sure that you can put tab A in slot B and move forward. It's about your shareholder interests. It's about your company image. All of those things fall into this. So please don't look at this as just a simple supply chain issue. What I'd like to do now is move into where all this gets started. And that generally starts with an RFP or an RFI or some similar document. And that's where the legal department of most of your companies gets engaged. But that too is not a standalone issue. The one thing that is unique to the legal department is that they must look at this holistically. They must look at all the legal aspects of all of the pieces of the puzzle that we've talked about so far. And Jennifer, I'd like for you to talk a little bit about how your legal team looks at these issues in that different focus, and also to talk about the engagement of legal in this whole procurement process scenario.
Okay, great. I have responsibility at Encore for not only legal matters, but also compliance matters as well. My focus tends to be more IT related, but the method that we use for those deals applies to any of our procurement efforts or our sourcing efforts. When we engage with a new vendor or potential vendor and go through the RFP process, oftentimes legal is involved. And we start to look at the vendor itself. And one of my sayings, I guess, and I know a couple of y'all have heard it before, is legal can't fix the vendor's health. You have to start with what is the vendor, what does the vendor provide, where does the vendor stand financially, not just because you want a financially viable vendor, but you need to understand, could they be compromised? Could they do something or have a reason to threaten your company in some way? you look at the people who would be on the deal. I mean, and it might be early in the RFP process. You're trying to figure out, where do they get their people from? Where do they get their intellectual property if they're developing for you? Do they have the right to license it? Do they engage foreign nationals? There's so many questions that go into the process. So when I come on board, I look at things that most lawyers look at, like indemnities and confidentiality provisions. But I also ask the questions, what kind of information are we dealing with? Are they going to hold our information? Where do they provide services from? Again, who do they engage with to get resources? Are they employees? Are they contractors? Are they overseas? Are they in state? Again, to what Bill said, or Ron said actually, was, where did the inputs to the ultimate end product come from? So I manage a lot of that and engage with different people within my own organization to bring in the subject matter experts to form a team. And that team comes together in the beginning, and then we move through the entire RFP process, so that what doesn't happen is at the end we just select a vendor that we really, really like, but we find out, oh, they don't have cybersecurity insurance or even errors and omissions insurance to protect against data breaches. Or, actually, as it turns out, they handle most of their development operations offshore, and that's not going to work with us based on what we need for them to bring to us. So in this sense, I'm talking about bringing in goods and services, not really bringing in components to send something back out. It's us acquiring products and services to use in the delivery of electricity. And a lot of the times, if we form a team early and we work the process, the solution that we get in the end is not just a good legal solution or a good vendor solution, but it works holistically and meets our security demands as well. We're very fortunate to also have a very strong security team that is willing to offer huge amounts of time and dedication to serving each of our sourcing efforts, and that does go a long way.
Absolutely. As we have talked about in the beginning of this conversation, the commitment to team is very important, because again, you can find breaks in the system in places where you've never had to look before. Do you think about your transportation, your warehousing? What do you do with a piece of software when you're updating it or you're going in to do a repair? All of those are places where things like Trojan horses and worms and the various things can be put into a system that don't even respond today or next week, but give people the ability to learn about your products or be disruptive to your sales and marketing at any time. And I guess one of the things, and Paula, maybe you could address, what do you all look for when you are trying to develop a third, or find a third party to manage your data, your other items that you're purchasing in the supply chain in this day and age?
Excellent question, and I think all the folks out here in the room are thinking, we just go out and buy something and it's going to be fine, because these vendors, we're not expecting them to be cyber experts, but we also trust that they're going to give us the product that our RFI said is going to deliver. So all we are caring about is functionality, but in reality, we're not expecting these bad things that could happen. And they may not have invested a lot inside their teams that develop that hardware or software with secure coding. So what we look for, what we've done is built kind of an end-to-end process. And part of it also is about education. So we educate all these folks along the way, like what this panel is right here. We've got legal, we've got the IT folks, and different folks inside IT. We don't just look at the security folks to be your subject matter expert. We're asking the project managers, the people who are putting testing code when we deliver it to production. And all these steps along the way that we're building key steps into that quality before it gets put into production. And folks like Ron's area is trying to test all this software, but we don't have all that, let's say, it's not done yet. So we have to trust ourselves and our teams to go test that before it gets to production. So what we put in place are our steps. And in the RFP process, we're going to ask the vendors a list of 5, 6 questions. We have a tool that, you know, for bidding, that you put in all those requirements. We've actually given the sourcing folks a list of about 10 questions, so hand that in with the requirements. And that's how we weed out some of the very first vendors that come in with their product. And if they don't cut the mustard, they're not in for the next round. And then we get it down to 3 or 4 folks. And when those people come in to do their face-to-face demos, we have assigned security experts or the enterprise architects, the solution architects that go and do another drill down. And they'll ask them even more questions about their product. And then once we get to choose the right one that we want to put our money on, and it's new technology, it may be that new AMI meter that we're going to hook up, right? We're going to bring in actual folks to penetration test that technology before it gets out there. And we're going to look for those vulnerabilities that could be inside that product. And they didn't even know it. They didn't intentionally build it with a vulnerability, but it shows up during our testing. So those are some of the key pieces that we've put in.
Well, let me ask all of you a question that deals with your suppliers and how, in a world where supply chain now means global supply chain, how do you identify and how do you check on your potential suppliers who are in very disparate parts of the world and as it relates to cyber? How do you know that they are financially stable, not just that they're a person or entity that can develop the product or the component or the service, whatever it may be, but how do you know about them and how do you go about searching to be sure that you're not walking into a trap, not because you meant to,
Sure.
but just because you couldn't reach far enough and somebody thinks it's the best price or whatever?
Oh, we do a lot of research before we even start the process. You know, we find who is the best player in this space, and then you research, you know, how they're, what they've delivered to market, and look at their track record. You know, there's a lot of mom and pop shops out there that will sell you the next thing at a nice price, or the guy next to you on the airplane decides to cue you in on the next best thing. And they sound good and they're cheap, but they're not going to give you what you need in the long run. So we'll do our homework on that, on their strength in those spaces. But even more so, we will make sure that their standards, their cyber standards, are the same as ours. We use the National Institute, the NIST standards. Mm-hmm. And, you know, that's what we're asking of them. If you can't hit what we're going to do in-house, it's our house, our rules, we ask the same of our vendors and the folks that we buy technology from.
How far down the supply chain do you all go? Ron, you might want to address this in looking at your component providers. How far down that list do you check to find out about their stability?
We look all the way down to suppliers of our suppliers, where the raw materials coming from. Even with semiconductor suppliers or passive component suppliers, we want to know where their dependencies are, because that could impact our product availability. One other thing that I would say we do is, I know Paul was talking about external software sometimes. One of the things that we do is we have actually, in all the products we make, we own every line of the source code. And we don't send out any of our source code to suppliers or schematics. And so we can control that. So we have our own proprietary operating system, so we're not dependent on Microsoft or other operating systems. We have all our firmware is signed and secured and kept in a secure directory at our companies, and all the way through manufacturing. So, and we use proprietary architectures as opposed to field programmable gate arrays. So that helps us to control the environment in which our product operates and make it more robust to outside attack. And again, I think directly you're talking about, Bill, was you do have to get out there and understand where these materials are coming from and what the risks are.
I think that the point that Annette made at the very beginning about the jump drives that were being handed out, we don't tend to think, not just in the utilities industry, which is relatively new to this type of cyber attack because of the smart grid. And let's face it, if the electricity goes out, virtually everything in our lives go out. So that's why we have to begin to look at this. Jennifer, as you all work as a utility, do you look at public-private partnerships to help either solve problems, develop better infrastructure that you can hook onto, those types of opportunities to engage the government in projects or in solutions that are bigger than any one company or even any industry may be able to take on?
Well, what I personally see in my particular company and just in the Texas area is with respect to lots of participations in user groups and driving the creation of standards, and even in the cybersecurity space, I know that we've had a group of people go to Washington and visit with people, just trying to get clarity around what are the standards going to be, what are NERC standards, how are they going to change, those types of things, getting that input and then integrating it. I mean, I think that we don't necessarily partner, and maybe I'm taking a pure legalistic view of that, but we are very active in our participation in groups and getting out and leading the way in the formation and asking, when we're looking at product acquisition and stuff too, we do partner in that sense and look to provide our, I guess, perspective on things.
Okay, good. Before we move to the audience and get that hand raising part going, I'd like to quickly ask each of you to give me a 30-second best lesson learned so far about cybersecurity in the procurement process. And we'll start with Paula down there.
Sure. One of our best lessons learned was one size doesn't fit all. You really can't, we have all these standards and they're great, but you can't put every requirement on every size solution you're trying to put into your company. So what we've done is create a high, medium, and low type of, like a risk-based approach to saying what do we really need to do and why do we really need to care about penetration testing that technology versus scanning that code, or just really just kicking the tires real hard and did we put in the right controls. So depending on if it's privacy impact, is the data going off site? So do we have a third-party vendor that we're doing business with and it's going to be high-risk data? We send them a questionnaire that'll keep them up for 2 weeks, answering. Versus if it's going to be public information, we don't care so much, we'll give them a short list of questions to answer. So we take a risk-based approach because you just can't, cookie cutter this kind of thing. You need to really hit the high-risk areas.
Jennifer?
Paul, that's a very good point. I think kind of following along with that, the lesson learned is general. Be ready, know your part, and know everybody else on your team's part. It's not a siloed response. You have to be aware of the things that the entire team for your company is looking out for, and that way you can kind of catch the loose ends. Because it is not a one size. You will never have the same set of facts repeat themselves. It just doesn't happen.
Ron?
Even though, one of our lessons learned was, even though we have robust, as I mentioned, firmware in our systems that we own, there are times when customers order systems where they want to use a Windows computer attached to the system for a human-machine interface. And so once you have Windows software, then you're more vulnerable to viruses. And in this one particular case, we did sell a system where even though we had instructed the customer not to connect their Windows-based system to an outside, outside the particular application, after we left and finished the installation, they connected it to that network, and the computer acquired a virus one way or another. So the lesson learned there is you need to educate the customer and architect the system so that that's not possible, or have an alternative to Windows-based computers that are more robust for human-machine interface.
Okay, thank you all. As I said at the beginning, we want this to be a dialogue. We'd like to engage the audience, not just with questions, but if you have lessons learned, if you have ideas, if you're doing things that you think are unique but that are helpful, let's get involved in the dialogue. And so can I see some hands go up with questions, comments, or thoughts in all of this? Yes, ma'am. You're the closest to almost the closest to the front. And if you'd please identify yourself and who you're with.
My name's Trudy Linson, and I'm with Bonneville Power. And one thing I struggle with is there's so many apps available, and there's so much out there on the cloud. And what should we put on the cloud, and what should we keep internal? Have you? I heard Ron talk about firmware, and that's held very tightly. Have you made any decisions or thought about, okay, this is definitely corporate data, we're keeping it here internal, versus putting things out on the cloud?
Ladies, Ron?
Yeah, we keep most stuff internal. I mean, we do host information, but we typically don't. If we put something, we have private clouds for our own information, but we wouldn't put it, just for virtualization and those kinds of efficiencies. But we don't typically engage in the cloud services. But third-party service providers is a little different space there.
Well, like e-commerce and those types of applications.
Yeah, we're an old energy company, 100 years old, so we have our systems are in-house.
I think
our
there's
back office.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
No, I think that that's a very important question, because relatively speaking, the cloud is a new phenomenon, and whether it's in the utilities industry or other industries, there's still a lot of discomfort in what that means. The very question that you ask. I think the more that question gets asked, the more technology will begin to provide a more secure environment, and not just one that the scientists and the architects know is more secure, but that the management, the data processing, the people who have to deal with it every day become more secure with. So I think we're on a real frontier with cloud computing and what that can do for all of us. So I think that's, as we write down lessons learned from this session, I think that's one that we need to explore to help people become more comfortable with what security measures are out there and what would make it a more usable feature in the world today.
I've got the mic, so I'll go next. I'm going to have several questions, but I'll start with my first one with you, Bill. I'm with CenterPoint Energy, a utility in Houston. I'm David Hess. My first question is, in your experience research, what are these folks that are engaging in this cyber activity, what are they after? I've heard you talk about intellectual property, stealing technology, those kinds of things. That's one I'm familiar with. Others might be there just doing it to disrupt, the grid or whatever. What are these people after? What's motivating them? Is there for profit other than the intellectual side? If they're just out here disrupting the grid, why are they doing this? That's my first question.
I think that all of the above is the right answer for that. We see the competitiveness issue as a critical part of this, economic competitiveness. This is the 21st century version of industrial espionage. The intellectual property, the disruptive factor is always something that's important because, as I mentioned before, if the electricity goes out, then virtually everything else stops. Even the phone system begins to deteriorate, as we found on 9/11 when all this happened. So I think there are different motivations. The desire to be financially successful, depending on what they want to do to disrupt. I mean, if you think about if they had the capability to disrupt the utilities infrastructure on the same day as 9/11, how much worse would all of the things have been that day? How much more dependent would we be on India, China, whoever is out there? There are millions of efforts to hack into the U.S. internet system, if you will, both the private system as well as the public sector system, every day to gain a competitive advantage in a global marketplace. So I think that's really the primary motivation, is to either know what we know so that they can move ahead of us, or know what we know so they can, if somebody chooses to take on a dastardly act, regardless of what happens, that's why they want to be there. And even for natural disasters, you've got situations where people want to find out what other people know so that they can take advantage of that economically. So I think there's a multitude of answers to that, and that's probably a long answer to a relatively simple question. But do you have some other questions?
Can I add to Bill's?
Oh,
and
yeah,
that was
sure.
I think you were spot on the motivation. It's usually the espionage for your business, your IP, and some people just want to get your information and sell it. It's just, there's a market for that. So someone's trying to get rich off of that. But the best thing is that you are doing right now is realizing that threat is real. So it doesn't always matter what the motivation is. What they're trying to do, the bad actor that you talked about earlier, is take advantage of that vulnerability that might be somewhere inside the hardware or software that you guys are out there buying that we have to go protect. Because it only takes someone to click on that silly link on that email that we're being spearphished all the time, because it happens daily inside our companies, that someone is just going to send you that link that's going to drop that payload that's going to sit on your network, and it's just going to hang there for months, just gathering information and pushing it out a little at a time. And that's what we're watching for. And that's why we're testing and we're scanning that software, and we constantly have this monitoring going on, so we're watching for it. So that's why we educate our folks. Everybody, the entire workforce at Duke Energy is phished by my team. We have a whole program that does that just to teach them that lesson, and so they can understand why it's important to them to only open the right emails. So that's why we want to encourage, it's important to you all as buyers of technology, that's why we're all caring about this, because it's that one little vulnerability that could damage the company. So it's a good question.
I'd like to clarify one thing is, we're talking about two different applications. One application is what I call a control system for electric power, which is designed specifically for the flow of electric power and operating breakers when it's important to do so. And I think that is, those are applications that are protected and designed very carefully by highly skilled people, and they're much harder to get access to for outsiders. And I think there's a lot of reports out that suggest that maybe there's been some attempts by outsiders to penetrate that. I don't know of any control action that has yet been verified to have happened from outsiders. So I would say,
Control action, you mean like opening or closing a switch?
yes, yes, right. So not that it couldn't happen, but I think there's a lot more control at that level. And there's a lot of things you can do. I've got a pamphlet or a one-page note here that we can hand out in the back called the 10 Tips for Improving the Security of Your Assets, such as knowing all the communication paths to your assets, such as breakers or disconnect switches, and make sure that you include paths that might be accessible locally through some substation control like a thumb drive, and draw a picture of your assets and see where all the links go. And another thing is use and manage strong passwords. We all know what a strong password looks like. And secure your communications with your control systems with encryption and authentication tools. So this we can point you to. I don't know if we have enough copies for everybody, but we can tell you what the link is for the control system side. Then the business system side, I think you have, as Paul was talking about, a slightly different approach that you're all the time. I mean, there's lots of documented penetrations and some phishing types of things, and what you were talking about was quite appropriate.
I just want to throw out a couple of statistics to you all. According to the Electronic Components Industry Association, counterfeiting accounts for over $100 million a year in that industry alone. HP estimates that 10% of every commercial home grade and office grade computer, there's 10% counterfeited parts in every one of those computers. So the process gets much bigger. When you look at your overall, not just in the development and the manufacturing, but when you look at the cost of cargo theft in this country, $15 to $30 billion a year just in this country, and that all falls off of the bottom line of each one of your companies in one way or another. And when you start moving parts around in transport that have IT components to them, that just causes the opportunity for mischief to grow and grow as we become more sophisticated in the development, and we don't concurrently become more sophisticated in the security.
Bill, let me comment on that a little bit. Could you bring up slide 16? Oh, this is about the concept of chain of custody, I think is what you're talking about. So there, I think what you're focusing at is avoiding interdiction of in the supply chain. What we've done here is we've learned to buy and sell direct with the manufacturers and and never use brokers. Brokers who are unauthorized suppliers is often where counterfeit parts show up. We inspect packaging of every lot that comes in and track lot numbers to make sure that that matches up with the direct from manufacturer information. If there's any doubts, we x-ray it. You can tell from x-rays whether the part, if it's a semiconductor part, was the one that you originally qualified. We hold our own inventory. We also select shipping methods with care. Now, one of the things if you think about chain of custody, it's important that you know where things come from the point of manufacture till it gets into your hands. And we even thought about offering, for sensitive applications, a service where our company could deliver the product with our transportation modes. We happen to have access to our own aircraft, so we could deliver direct to the customers for sensitive applications and also provide technical staff. And that could help avoid another possible interdiction mode. Katie?
I don't have,
No.
I could ask a question, but does anyone else have?
Additional questions, comments? Again, yes, sir. Right down front here.
First, thanks for taking the time today. Just have a quick question, probably more for the utility ladies up there, but have you guys done anything around, we talk about the front end of this cybersecurity and controlling the supply chain with cybersecurity, how you do chain of custody transfers, all of that stuff. But within your organizations, have you done anything on the back end where your employees could potentially, stick a zip drive in and, cause havoc, clicking on an email and opening up and wrecking things? Have you guys put any policies or anything in place within your companies to combat that?
Yes, I can actually speak,
Jennifer.
probably at length, so I won't bore you, but yes, we have, most companies have policies and procedures. If you go back to your office and read your policies and procedures manuals, there should be a ton of stuff about what to do with confidential information, how to treat customer-sensitive data, those types of things, It's all pretty self-evident, but we do have policies and procedures. We have regular code of conduct training. We also have cybersecurity training. We have quarterly, like intranet postings highlighting an issue like spear phishing, and we've even had one about the little flash drives, things like that, be aware. But really what it all comes down to is keeping a very watchful eye on the people who are at your place of employment or who are out representing you. That's one of the things I think that we, at least in the IT space, I can speak very well about that. We keep a close eye on who's doing what, even paying attention to things, rumors, things you hear on the ground, that stuff, type of stuff. We have a compliance hotline as well if anybody likes to make a claim, and that would include something along the lines of cybersecurity claims or claims of theft of data. But your HR process too, making sure you engage your HR people to think, when you've got an exit interview or you're rolling a contractor off, look at what they've been involved in. Why are they being rolled off? What kind of access have they had? Have you shut down their access credentials quickly, not a week later, taking their computers, wiping their computers, imaging their computers before you wipe them? There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes. And my guess is most of your companies do a lot of that already, just as regular course of action, but you really have to start paying and have a heightened attention, because that's exactly one of the main, as I understand it, one of the primary ways that people actually do, other than spear phishing and things like that, is a rogue employee. Somebody who's very, very dissatisfied with the situation, either a contractor or an employee, and they have access and take it with them.
I'm glad you brought that up, if you all pick this up on page 29, Telvent, who some of you may be familiar with, they have a really interesting agile software development process that really would address that issue, because it would require a minimum of 4 people in their company to be plotting together in order to get new software out, or to put some type of a worm or other malady inside of it. So it's on page 29. Hope you'll pick one up and read that. That may be a help to you.
I'll just add a couple of more things to what Jennifer was saying. On top of all the policies and security awareness program, we also rolled out an awareness for international travel. So we put a program in place that hooked up to our booking system. So if anybody goes out of the country, it triggers an alert to our local IT folks, and they call that person and say, hey, I hear you're going to some country, and we have all our countries risk rated for cyber threats. And if you're traveling to one of the high-risk countries, we tell them, you're leaving your BlackBerry, you're leaving all this stuff behind, and we have loaners for you. Or while you're there, you're not doing this, that, and another thing. So we put that whole program in place a few years ago, and it seems to be working well, along with some of these other security awareness programs. But it's always vigilance, and that's why on Valentine's Day we sent out, I don't know if you saw that one, Annette, we sent out an email from our phishing tool to a lot of folks and said, you know, here's an e-card for you from your Valentine. And, you know, you'd be surprised how many people clicked on that. You know, everybody knows e-cards. Oh, you know, it's not going to be so. And so we had quite a few people learning a lesson that day. And so now we got people throwing emails back at us saying, should I open this? Should I not open it? So they're becoming more vigilant every day.
That's what you want.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly. Yes.
Okay, question number 2. This is for Paula, and I wanted to, you've already answered a lot of my question already through your checklists and so on, things like that. Sounds like you're talking to your supply chain folks and you're educating them and helping them through this, because they're on the front lines of this. Are you working with the entire supply chain folks, the people that are even doing tree trimming and construction, and is it mainly your folks that are buying your IT products, software, hardware, maintenance activities, those kinds of things, or does your work extend to the folks that are buying the transformers and the wiring cable and doing the tree trimmings and services and you know, staff augmentation, that kind of thing?
Well, currently, what we try to do in that space, and that's why I was telling Annette earlier, I said this has been eye-opening for me to be here with the real supply chain folks, because I don't get that far down to your point. Mm-hmm. So it is a lot of the enterprise sourcing folks, but we count on them to reach out, and that's why we educate them, especially when we use the bidding tools. And so that's why when we talk about collaboration, it's that journey, and this is another point, another lesson learned. It takes time. This journey doesn't happen overnight to get to have these steps in place. So we've surrounded ourselves with people we want to take the journey with, and there's some key folks in sourcing that we count on to get that message out and to make sure it keeps working. And if that person transfers, we make sure we have somebody that's going to take over that accountability. So we really have tried to you know, make sure that there's no gaps in that. But to your point, I personally don't, so that's why I'm so happy about being here. But we try to reach out through others to get there.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Good question.
Do you have your on-site contractors sign NDAs?
Absolutely. Even during before the bidding, you know, during the bidding process, we start with NDAs.
Jennifer, do you at your company?
Do you mean individual employees of contractors, or do you mean contractors as a whole?
Individual employees of contractors.
We tend, it really is a case by case. To Paul's point, if we're going to even enter, you know, first, I guess from a purely legal perspective, my first question is, well, in the beginning of RFPs, who's sharing what? Because if I'm not sharing anything and they're wanting me to sign, I don't want to sign. So there's a balance, there's a question answer type of scenario thing I go through. But with respect to having individual employees of contractors sign NDAs, that's really on a case-by-case basis, because what you have in that situation is really, what are you going, ultimately, who do you want to hold responsible? Me holding an individual responsible is not a very good situation. There could be arguments even that the person signed and they didn't understand what they were signing. They're not my employee. I don't want co-employment issues. So we tend to sign or have very strong confidentiality provisions between us and the third-party service provider that they then flow down to their employees as the employer or any subcontractors they're bringing on. I will say if they're subs, that is different. We have signed individual NDAs with subs and other documentation directly with subs to make sure that we've established intellectual property rights with respect to anything that we've been developing, particularly if it's developed outside of the United States, which doesn't happen a whole lot in our company, but occasionally. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir, in the back.
I don't think I need my, I'm at Sports Farm in Cascade. We're a full manufacturer, but my question is for Jennifer. Early on, you talked about asking your suppliers for cybersecurity insurance and something else, and I missed that something else.
So, oftentimes in the beginning of a RFP process, particularly if we're going to have, in the rare case that we are engaging with a third-party service provider that will be holding our information off-site, and even if it's not even the most, it's again rare that it occurs, it's not normally the most confidential information, but depending on what the information is and where they are, in all of those cases, though, we start out with, do you have cybersecurity insurance? Because if you go through insurance, I'm not an insurance expert, but if you go through insurance and you read all of their, professional liability insurance, errors in general liability, there's usually exclusions. So you have to look to cybersecurity insurance or errors and omissions insurance with a particular type of rider associated with it. A lot of the vendors, you can almost tell where you're going to go, from the beginning of the discussion when they respond, I don't know what you're talking about. And yet they deal with information that they house, and they don't, to me that's always kind of a signal of where is their level of sophistication. And then as you move through the discussion, and I would recommend getting an insurance person involved who's able to go back to your company's broker at least and get some insight into, what does this insurance look like? How much would it cost if we needed to get it? We look at that too. But that's what I'm talking about. Starting points, cybersecurity insurance, to the tune of $10 million. And that's outside of any other insurance that you might have. That's a high threshold. A lot of companies, at least it's been my finding, don't tend to respond with a big yes to that. But it does start the discussion. You do end up usually in a place where you feel pretty good. And then you really do have to, it's something I was going to say earlier, what we were discussing, when you're moving through a discussion with a vendor and it's concerning your company's information, your customer's information, and they're either too quick to say yes or completely not knowledgeable, that's usually not a good sign. So that's what I was referring to.
I have a question that deals with the uniqueness of your industry. When you're talking to the new vendors in this new environment, how do you address to them the impact of an infrastructure that has a 30-year lifespan in many instances for products that have a 30-minute lifespan? Have you all addressed that with particularly new vendors? Ron? Or audience?
So let me clarify the question. So if you're dealing with a new supplier that may not be familiar with the industry, our expectations of long life.
Yes, the industry, by moving into more IT-based products, and as you've pointed out, there are a lot of new entrants into that field that are coming to you as perhaps valued suppliers, but haven't really given that much thought to the idea that these are products that are historically designed to last as much as 30 years. I was at a conference and I heard a gentleman say that if you drive down the road and you look up at the transformers on the poles, that the average lifespan of one of those is about 50 years. He also pointed out that the average age of most of those today is about 48 years. As technology improves, those products that will replace those 50-year transformers are going to need to have a lifespan of some length greater than what we generally expect out of IT. What's happening in the industry to begin to address that long-term productivity activity, if anything?
One thing I notice is in our product area, the life-limiting technologies that are in some of the products have to do with electrolytic capacitors. There's been a technology change or technology changes to improve the life, and I know there will be more where we can design power supplies probably without the aluminum electrolytic capacitors. So I think we're going to use technology, leverage technology to get longer and longer life. Currently, we design for 25-year life, and many of our products are still operating after 30 years, and we're able to support them. I think one other thing I was thinking about was when you were talking about that was a lot of these IT products, you have to ask the question, where were they made? Because if some of the new consumer-based standards, I see a lot of that hardware being made in Asia, and that's a risk in and of itself because, well, we all know about the level of that risk. So we wouldn't look at any of those technologies just because of that cybersecurity risk right there in our company.
I think, at least from the IT perspective, I don't know the expectation. Well, IT vendors on a whole, and sorry if there's any IT vendors out there, I mean, they have a way to make sure you have longevity. It's called maintenance and support, and you continue to pay them year over year so that you can have that longevity. But I think that's one of the things, at least on the forefront, when you're looking at your bid process and what you're buying, understanding what that lifespan is, and then addressing it if they've made any promises, at least from a legal perspective, making sure those are included in the contract. But I think it is definitely it will be changing as we go forward.
Well, that brings up kind of an interesting question of, yes, they have an incentive through maintenance and support, but how do you check to be sure that they're not putting in something that requires maintenance into their software when they sell it to you, so that everybody says that your new car, after such an, if you have a 3-year warranty on it at 38 months, you start having problems with it. So how do you ensure that vendors who do have an incentive to keep you as a customer aren't doing things to your software? Again, these are areas where there can be an insertion of well-meaning but costly activities.
So there's a few steps we put inside our change management process for that particular reason. Depending on the scope of the upgrade or maintenance that may be involved, we would go through the whole testing cycle again to scan the code, retest that infrastructure, and make sure it's up to snuff. So we actually would go through that exercise again, just depending on how big the uplift is of the maintenance, once taking a risk-based approach.
Okay, well, I want to thank all of you for coming today and thank our panelists for giving us a lot to think about. We have handouts that will be in the back of the room. You can pick these up, and they'll also be available on the presentation that you'll have access to at the end of the conference. So please fill out your evaluation form, and we do look at these forms. If you have any suggestions of ideas for programs for next year or follow-up to this presentation, we'd certainly like to hear about it. Thank you for coming.